Welcome to Heart Over Gold, the channel where love, kindness, and humanity shine brighter than any fortune. In today's story, a tale of love, regret, and quiet strength. This story follows Robert and Rose as they navigate betrayal, silence, and the chance to rebuild what was lost. Can they heal and find redemption, or is their past too broken to fix? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, and keep up with our latest stories. He screamed at her. He demanded she abort the child. She nodded quietly, accepting his words without hesitation. She marked the date on the calendar, knowing what she had to do. But when he arrived at the clinic, filled with regret and hesitation, he found her already leaving. "It's over," she said, her back still turned, her voice flat and final. "You don't have to worry anymore." 8 months later, he saw her, her belly swollen with life, and in that instant, everything fell into place. She never went through with the abortion. No, she had only severed him from the story quietly and decisively. Now, as he looked at her, he couldn't help but wonder, was it too late to fix what had been broken? Could silence truly cost him a second chance at love? What keeps a man by a woman's side isn't love, it's obligation. The words were spoken, casually, almost without thought, as if they were as simple as spreading butter on toast. It was just another Tuesday night, unremarkable and warm, like most nights in their quiet house. The only sounds breaking the silence were the occasional clink of cutlery and the soft creak of the rocking chair on the terrace. It was at that table, swallowed by the dimness of the living room, that Robert Sterling's father casually let the words slip from his lips. Between sips of beer and bites of meat, without even glancing at Robert, he said, "A real man swallows pain and moves on. That love is for the weak." Robert heard the words, but didn't really listen, not yet. There, in the stillness, he realized, or maybe he only accepted it, that he was living a life he never chose. Rose, sitting opposite him, didn't even lift her eyes. She had long since learned to listen to these words without flinching. They didn't wound her as they might have once done. They hurt, yes, but she had grown a callus over the years. With a calm and practiced movement, she spread butter on her toast, eyes fixed downward, as she wondered quietly why she still bothered trying. They had married young, the villagers said, because they were in love. Some even believed it would be one of those eternal kinds of love that withstood the tests of time. But those who really knew Robert, and perhaps even he himself, knew the truth. He married Rose because his father had decided it was time, because Rose was a good girl, one with clean hands and sweet eyes, eyes too kind to ever refuse. The problem was that Rose loved him, truly loved him, not the fairy tale kind of love, but the kind that's so real you don't even know how to live without it. She loved the way he was, loved his silences, his quiet mannerisms, even his flaws that everyone else criticized. She believed, deep down, that with time, his heart would awaken, but time doesn't awaken what's locked. Robert, for his part, never knew what to do with Rose's love. He felt it was too much, a weight that suffocated him. And he also felt guilty, not for not loving her, but because she didn't seem to notice. When Rose smiled and brought him cinnamon coffee, made just how he liked it, he felt a knot in his stomach. He wanted to thank her, wanted to smile, but his mouth seemed to have forgotten how. His love wasn't for her. It lived in the past, tucked away in the corners of his mind, buried under a name he kept as a secret, a name that burned every time he thought of it. The house they lived in was simple, nothing extraordinary, but it had character. It was built by their father's hands, with exposed brick walls, a smell of firewood in the air, and windows that let in the mountain breeze. But what blew inside that house wasn't just a breeze, it was absence. Rose moved around the house, as if she were dancing alone, tending to plants in the courtyard, hanging sheets that smelled like soap, and writing little notes she hid in the pockets of his shirts. Notes like, "Today, I dreamed of us on the beach," or, "You smiled in your sleep last night." He read them, he kept them, but he never replied. In the village, they said he was cold. She said he was just tired, that someday he would wake up different. But the days passed, and he didn't wake up. One rainy night, everything almost changed. Rose fell ill, her fever spiked, and she trembled uncontrollably. Her body was weak, fragile. Robert raced to the pharmacy in the village, soaked through with rain. He returned with medicine, warm towels, and a silence that seemed desperate. He stayed up with her all night, adjusting the blankets, changing her compresses, murmuring words he didn't even know how to say. When her fever finally broke, she fell asleep, resting her head on his chest. He didn't move. He stayed there, staring at the ceiling, with a faint sensation that something inside him wanted to break free. but a deed and single quotes teed out the next morning. When she woke up, she smiled at him tenderly. She wanted to capture that moment, hold it forever. But he simply got up, said he had to go to work, and walked away. It was as if nothing had changed, but something had. Something small, discreet, but real. Still, the distance between them remained a chasm without a bridge. Attempts to cross, but always walls on either side. Rose began speaking less, stopped writing the little notes, stopped hiding his coffee, and making it just for him. The silence between them grew, until it became a presence. It wasn't something to avoid anymore. It was a thing that filled all the spaces. Rose looked out the window one evening, watching the branches of a tree sway in the wind, and wondered when it had all started like this. When had she stopped trying to be happy, and started only trying to survive? Robert, on the other hand, felt the weight of expectations pressing down on him like an invisible sandbag. It wasn't her fault, he told himself. It was hers. But deep down, he knew the truth. The problem wasn't her, it was him. It always had been. It was just easier to blame someone else than to face it. His father's words echoed in his head, and Robert swallowed it all, the boredom, the discomfort, the need to disappear. He swallowed Rose. She made plans and considered names, routes, and what it would look like to escape out of love, a love that was now solely hers rather than fear. That being developing in silence, shielding her from the inside, and that evening, going to, she whispered, "You don't need anyone else," as she gazed at the dark ceiling. "Have you?" And that was sufficient. What brave, a mother's quiet strength. What actions would you take to shield your child from a traumatic past? Please share your ideas in the comments section. Remember to subscribe and like this video so that this motivational tale can continue. Robert was across town, drinking with women he didn't really know and friends he didn't really know. He laughed aloud as though the world were easy, as though everything was okay. But there was a strange echo, uneasiness, and emptiness deep down. He was unaware that the biggest lie of all was that no drink could fill it. A story was about to start, and that Rose was not just she was the victim's author. And like any story's creator, she no longer. Rose grabbed an invisible pen and started rewriting her life, because she wanted to live. Fate in shaky but steady hands. The following morning, before the first rooster crowed, she silently departed the village while carrying a small suitcase. Test results concealed among cotton garments, and their final wedding photo, not for sentimental reasons, but as a reminder that things would never be the same again. The bus drove off, its headlights flicking off. Rose didn't turn around in the shadows, not because she was strong, but because fatigue. Through the misty bus, she could see a house behind her where love never really entered. Window, she noticed the hills' silhouettes disappearing into the mists, as though the world she left behind was slowly disappearing. She went to San Jerónimo, a forgotten community tucked away in Oaxaca. Mexico's arid hills is where her maternal grandmother, Dona Mercedes, was a small-eyed woman with a firm voice whose face displayed each year of life as a symbol of wisdom. Rose simply showed up when Dona Mercedes opened, without making any announcement, the door silently clinging to her skin as she gazed at her granddaughter, her eyes swollen, and comprehended everything. She opened the door for her and gestured toward the bed in the return to sewing, as though it were any other day in the back room, because women they provided sanctuary without making a fuss, and the first day went by without. While they were sorting corn, they only asked the second question on the third. Her grandmother said to the chickens, "If you're hungry, eat. If you want to cry, cry." Rose bit her lips and didn't respond, saying, "Cry, but don't live with all that locked inside." Continued shelling corn until her fingers burned. In that village it was easier to feel pain than to talk. Had a different cadence. No internet, no rush, and no discomfort. Looks only at the barefoot, dry ground, and strong wind. Rose began dressing like the local women as kids ran on dirt roads. Her hair was always tied back. She wore cotton blouses and wide skirts in an effort to vanish at the tiny medical facility. A gentle nurse heard the infants. Rose closed her eyes and heard her heartbeat for the first time. It was a dull, powerful drumbeat, non-negotiable. She sobbed quietly while resting her head on the soiled exam table sheet. She needed to, because there was life in that sound, not because she was depressed. Start over. The false statement was made by an inquisitive neighbor. "You appear to have been a mother." Rose was hesitant, but said, "I was, but I lost it." The lie was painful, but it also kept the news safe. Spread swiftly, leading everyone to assume that she was there recuperating from a loss. Indeed, she wasn't who they had assumed. In the days after Rose, she read books that had been collecting dust on the shelves, took care of the plants, and assisted her grandmother with sewing. She jotted down potential names for the letters she never sent for years. Baby, and she was relearning how to smile in front of the mirror, exist while sitting on an old cushion on the terrace at night. She listened to as her grandmother prayed. She thought that maybe for the first time, she was Donna. Mercedes said, "You don't need to run." During one of those evenings when she was sewing, Rose looked down and gave her a hug while saying, "But you can't hide forever either." "I'm not hiding, I'm just waiting to be strong." With a subtly expanding belly, the phrase "waited for child" it's created stuck in the mind for days. Village. She came across Letitia, a middle-aged mother of 2 kids with a difficult she didn't conceal anything in the past, and they became friends through understanding silence. One afternoon, Letitia made the direct inquiry after they exchanged glances and shared secrets without naming them. Rose asked without hesitation, "If he changes, would you forgive him?" Forgiving isn't the difficult part, regaining trust is the difficult part, and that was the point. Apologies, it's glass, and thread isn't used to fix broken glass. As if in an attempt to heal, time passed, but Rose knew there was no remedy. Decision, and she decided to proceed. Then, on the day she set the appointment because she needed to feel as though she had not, because she wanted to control that she was in charge of making the decision the night before, she remained awake, with her hand on her stomach and her head lost on the ceiling. She conversed with the infant without thoughtful words that seemed to be saying, "If you're going to be born, it's better not to be now in a world where no one wants you." But her heart hammered loudly and insistently, as though saying on the opposite side of the city that same evening, someone said, "I'm here and I want you." Robert had a dream in which Rose left a white clinic with blood on her hand. There was a strange sound, not a scream, not silence, and her eyes went empty. It cried like a baby, and when he woke up, his chest was thumping and he was covered in sweat. If he had run Killam and experienced fear for the first time without realizing it, snatched up his car keys and drove steadily, as though the wheels knew how to get there. When dawn arrived at the clinic, the street was deserted and a chilly wind blew, dragging dust, and then he noticed Rose emerge, her face heavy, her steps slow. Rose stopped, but she didn't look at him as he ran towards her with her head bowed, and her head downcast. "It's done. I had it taken out of him." The words were spoken like a blade without any drama or hesitation. He simply said. She continued to walk as he gazed at her, his mouth opening and closing silently. "You don't need to worry any longer." The world whirled around him, and he fell to his knees on the filthy pavement. "No," cried out inside of him, but it was too late, or so he thought. He was unaware that she had done nothing. She had simply chosen not to tell anyone else anything more. Never stayed. That lie was the final act of self-pity or love. Protection, because she was aware of what she was carrying inside from that point on, was solely hers, and whoever managed to stay, a lie was told for her safety, deeper than any blade. The truth. What would you do if you were Robert? Feelings of guilt and a startling realization? Let us know in the comments. Remember to subscribe and like this video for the upcoming chapter of this compelling tale. Later, lying in the Rose gently stroked her belly in a plain bed at her grandmother's house, saying, "They believe that you don't exist," she muttered, "but you and I do." She finally dozed off for the first time in the dark, her eyes still wet. Time without a burden for months, because, although she was the one writing at the time, one more, and the words that had been silent on Rose's lips now reverberated throughout Robert's life. Like this, he'd seen her leave the clinic and come home, or thinking she had left with a broken soul and an empty womb, carrying a burden he couldn't immediately identify, and he tried to pretend nothing had happened during the first few days. He spoke to friends and laughed at the same jokes, out drinking, but there was a dull sound that changed everything. Behind the music, the drinks didn't taste good, and he couldn't laugh, elucidate how the objects weren't merely there. The house was once silent, but now screamed. The teapot, the old curtain she cleaned once a week, the blue Robert walked through the rooms, the blanket folded on the sofa, everything serving as a reminder of what he never understood how to value. Like someone traversing ruins. And despite his best efforts to persuade himself that he was now free, something he began avoiding the mirror because he knew deep down that he had lost something more significant than any freedom. His own eyes accused him of. He was uneasy one night when he opened the door because he didn't recognize something. He discovered the small notes in the drawer of his bedside table while searching for any sleep aids. Rose had left those in notebooks, or in pockets among clothing. Yes, he did read them at the time, but he never gave them any weight. Today, each phrase was a dagger. "You grinned while you slept last night, and I spent hours observing you. I made cinnamon coffee because I know you like it strong, but today I thought you were in need of something sweet." And then folded in at The bottom of the drawer the last note was for, which sounds like someone concealing a part of their soul. If you, he read it out loud once, twice, 3 times, and I hope there's still time for him to ever truly love me. Moments before he broke. It wasn't a lovely cry, rather it was a collapse. His body was huddled on the floor, his hands shaking, his throat burning, his sobs muffled, wept like a person who had never learned, who constantly suppressed everything, and who was no longer able to. The night he realized what he had done was more than just filing for divorce. It was more than the she tried everything she insisted on, and it was about the days she rejected pregnancy. When he failed, regret arrived as a weight rather than a thought. On his neck a reverberating voice on the walls. She stayed, and your friends vanished because they were unaware, not because they were malicious. Robert was no longer the same. He didn't know how to handle what he had become. Drinking as much as he didn't laugh as much and had a lost, searching expression. One day he visited the park where he used to go for something that no one could return. Stroll with Rose. He sat on the bench beneath the big tree, which was her favorite. Rusty leaves. He spent hours observing passers-by, including a young couple. He didn't turn away as he passed, pushing a stroller, believing it might have been me. However, when he got home, he examined old pictures in a dusty album, and Rose smiled as she saw the picture of the two of them dancing at someone else's wedding. He was only there. He realized for the first time that he never really smiled in pictures with her, sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by records, notes, and memories previously disregarded, and he had a painful realization that he had previously lost her. In the days that followed, he tried to call her after realizing he had her, but the number no. He called Rose's mother after work, but she hung up without saying anything. He went to her parents' house, but no one responded to his messages. In response, he discovered that they had sold it and relocated Rose. Robert was no longer there, accepted a job at a mechanic's workshop and devoted his days to trying to live a normal life. He slept on the sofa at night, trying to avoid getting his soul dirty by scrubbing his hands with oil and grease. Rose's dreams became more intense, not for solace but as a form of punishment. She occasionally spoke while her eyes were staring at him in silence. She gave him a baby while crying, but she took it away before he could hold it. Loneliness became a habit, but it wasn't the kind of loneliness that one chooses. Imposed. He discovered a letter at the door one afternoon after returning from work. Sender's name in that handwriting he knew so well, with no address. His hands were shaking when he opened it. But it was an old note that she must have. I noticed you sleeping last night in a notebook that he had inadvertently left in a trash can, that someone had accidentally returned. I want to think that you said my name while you were dreaming. Did your lips move? Broke once more. He made the decision to clean the house the following day, as though he wanted to eliminate the hint of cowardice and the smell of omission. He tossed away what he didn't require. He placed the notes in a box, sealed it, and concealed it, but he was unable to remove everything that was hers, including the shampoo odor that lingered on the pillow. And occasionally his face was resting there as if he was looking for a place to hide. Now, there was a body. It took up space inside of him, spoke, and stopped him from grinning. Knowing that he couldn't go was the worst part of the day when Rose didn't show up as a memory, back because she had moved from where he had left her, and perhaps more importantly, Robert stopped waiting for him and started writing letters because he unburdened by loose texts, but unsure of where to send them, such as this one. I saw a woman today holding a child, and they were laughing. I believed that might have been you, it might have been ours, but it's not me. The worst thing he wrote was, I'm still alive, and I killed that possibility. He read aloud to no one else at times. At times, he tore up the pages right away, as though writing was an attempt to exorcise a ghost. He had made himself one evening. He wandered aimlessly. He traversed avenues, bridges, and streets he had never been on before. He sat on a pavement, and sobbed only when his body was unable to continue. Once more, it always felt like the first time, regardless of how many times he had done it. And he finally understood with his face in his hands. He was the man who didn't know how to love. And it wasn't just about Rose, the youngster who was raised to believe that emotion was weakness, the spouse who didn't learn to stay. And now that Dawn was coming home, there was nowhere to hide. He decided to start over, not because he felt sorry for her, but because he had to rebuild himself from the inside out. But the emptiness remained. Since there is love and silence left behind when someone leaves, Robert was learning that there is no cure, only coexistence. Coexist with the untimely love. Robert's regret is so profound that it is palpable. What do you anticipate being his next move on this challenging journey too? Can he ever find true peace through self-discovery? Share your thoughts and aspirations in the comments section. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video. Time had the cruel habit of imparting lessons during the powerful climax. In the months that followed, Robert changed not to take any more tests. His routine grew more subdued, as if he were looking for atonement but also realized what he had lost. Contained, there were no more distractions or rushes. The only place where his mind could relax was in the workshop, where he could hammer, tighten screws, and fix what was broken. Ironically, he was able to fix everything but his life. One afternoon, under a nearly melancholy blue sky and the throbbing streets of Guadalajara, Robert, who had left work early and taken a different route, walked aimlessly, and arrived at a square whose name he was unaware of. There was an elderly family's ice cream vendors, and fountain stone benches are strewn across the parched grass. A typical location, but on that particular day, everything came to a halt when he saw her. Rose was wearing a loose blouse across the street, but it wasn't enough to cover her belly. She walked slowly while holding one hand with firmness and tenderness, wearing a basic dress, low sandals, and one on her stomach and the other on her back. He had never seen her with her hair tied back like that before, but it was her. Continued to move as cars honked and kids laughed. But for Robert, the world ceased to make noise, and only that image remained. He believed he had lost the woman forever, but more than that, she never revealed the truth. The infant took one step, then a nadir, and came to a stop. The force of the impact was greater than the impulse. He felt a twinge of regret and an ache in his chest, not just astonishment. Had movement and flesh form, and he felt his legs falter, his eyes gasping for air filled, and without noticing his head, he sat on the pavement's edge. With his elbows bent and his knees resting on them, he stood between the sounds of the city, and he whispered to himself, "She lied, she didn't abort, she even protected me from that," and he sobbed once more, but in a different way. Rose crossed because there was hope now, something beyond guilt. Without noticing him, she went into a bakery, bought bread, and talked to the store clerk, gave him a small smile, and walked away. When she came by him again, he remained motionless and observed her. She appeared worn out, but her posture was fiercely calm, as if she had fallen but decided to get back up that night. Robert sat on the edge of the bed and gazed out the window while he was awake, eyes focused on the shadows, and eventually his mind conjured up a picture of him with the infant in his arms. The youngster gazed at him with eyes as deep as her own, and in the dream, he apologizes not for the past, but for not being better. Sweating, he awoke with the clarity of someone on a mission. He needed to be able to see her in person rather than just spotting her on the street, look her in the eyes and express all of the things that have been stuck. Even if she didn't want to listen, he knew he would be punished if she didn't forgive him. Couldn't arrive without anything or with flimsy words. The following morning, he requested 2 days off, told his boss he needed to take care of a personal matter, and traveled to Oaxaca by bus. He wasn't sure if she remained, but it was the only danger he faced. The road to San Jeronimo appeared longer than it actually was. With each turn of every stop along the road was a memory of what he might say. Arrived at dusk, when the sun had already set behind the mountains, and the village was still eerily quiet. As if someone was, he requested Dona Mercedes secrets from everyone, and a child gestured toward the house. Robert paused in front of the wooden gate with the weathered roof, and his heart throbbed in his chest. He inhaled deeply, knocked, and waited at the gate. Creaked before opening fully, and Donna, not Rose, responded. Mercedes, tiny, keen eyes, looked over Robert's entire body like examining a wounded animal that had made its way back to its home mountains. She simply opened the door a bit wider and let him in without saying anything at first. He complied by moving slowly across the crowded dirt courtyard that was blooming with flowers. In a haphazard but alive manner, "The scent of freshly rose doesn't want you here," she stated already, followed by brewed coffee and a heavy silence. Robert stood his ground while stirring something over the fire in the kitchen. I knew that his hands were shaking and his throat was dry, but I still had to come, Donna. I now understand why Mercedes didn't turn around, so I didn't come. I simply want to be here and do whatever she permits, without making any promises. The old you want to change, the woman said with a sigh that sounded more like a weary whisper. She placed the wooden spoon on the counter, turned around, and crossed her arms after he nodded, and his eyes went downcast, and gave him a direct look with the sourness of someone who has witnessed far too many men make empty promises, then remain, but without romance or commitments, simply presence, which he swallowed hard. She needs assistance, not a man. Those words pierce him like a calling or a sentence. The baby needs a father. Donna Mercedes set up the back room that same evening. It was small with a wardrobe that smelled of old wood and a single bed. But it was a start, and Robert has come prepared to confront his past, and he accepted it with humility. Can a relationship be genuinely restored from the ashes of betrayal? What do you think Rose's response will be? Share your strong opinions in the comments. Remember to like and subscribe to this video for the significant turning point. The next he heard footsteps in the kitchen at 6 in the morning and got up. Rose was facing away from him before the sun warmed the tiles. Using an air pump and a flour-stained apron, she stirred a pot without saying good morning. She didn't turn around. She just, "You don't need to act like everything is fine." "I didn't come to pretend anything," he said softly, and she kept stirring the pot. "How long are you staying?" She paused and took a deep breath. "As long as you allow me." Breath, then started to stir again. She didn't say anything else, and so it continued for days. Silent, tense, but polite cohabitation. Robert started to assist with minor tasks, cleaning the courtyard first, then bringing bags to the market. He prepared buckets of water for the plants, tended to the chicken coop, and as Donna he learned to make cinnamon tea with warm water when Rose's back hurt. Mercedes taught him. He silently watched and listened. One day he noticed Rose stretched and huffed as she tried to reach something on a high shelf. He insisted. "May I?" she asked slowly, hesitating before looking him in the eye for the first time. "Only if you ask permission." He inhaled deeply before saying, "May I help you, Rose?" She averted her gaze and moved slowly out of the way. It was only a flower jar. However, it seemed like a world to him. Days went by, but something was changing, but nobody called it. One sweltering afternoon as Donna Mercedes took a nap in, Robert struggled with the patio faucet, while Rose leaned on a stool and the hammock. The water pressure was low. He swore under his breath as water splashed everywhere, saying, "Damn it, just hope this." When Rose heard him, she let out a cry for the first time. Garbage doesn't explode. He turned, startled, and she lowered her head like someone laughing. Captured by a love she didn't want to acknowledge. What was that? He took a chance by saying, "Nothing. It's just that you haven't altered all that much." He grinned, uncertain whether it was a good or bad thing, but it was a sign in her room with the same teddy bear on the wooden crib. He once unconsciously brought something too small for what was lacking at the start of their marriage. Between them, the teddy bear now serving as a reminder of a time that has no longer existed. He came in slowly one day as Rose was folding baby clothes and asked, "May I?" She didn't respond, but she also didn't push him away when he went to the crib. He looked at her after carefully handling the teddy bear. "I wish I could go back," and she paused, looked at him, and her eyes were filled with tears. Eyes, but also firmness. "But it's useless, and you can't telling me that you've changed. I need to see and feel it instead of hearing it." "I'm trying to do that," nodded. The pause between them was no longer an abyss. A bridge was being built. It was slow, uncertain, but weeks went by. Robert was still there, silent and firm, and Rose gradually started to breathe differently while remaining fearful and cautious. However, she also changed because love doesn't always return. It's created from the ground up in a different manner, and no one was in a rush because the carefully glued pieces broke. Something more powerful than before, even if they never return to their previous state. A slow, painful, but sincere restoration of trust. What do you anticipate happening in the future? Will Robert and Rose's quiet efforts be sufficient to heal a broken past? Let us know in the comments. Remember to subscribe and like this video so you can watch the amazing climax. In the house was dark, and the early morning hours seemed to fall out of the sink. Rose screamed, dry and intense, and it pierced the world while everyone else slept. Robert, who had been a light sleeper since moving, said the walls were like muffled thunder. Leaping out of bed as though under attack, he entered the tiny back room without even putting on his shoes, his heart thumping, his eyes burning as he ran through the house. He discovered Rose hunched over in the hallway, both hands drenched in cold sweat, clutching her belly. He didn't hesitate when she cried, "She's coming now," as she whispered through clenched teeth in a painfully raspy voice. Donna Mercedes was already there when he retrieved the keys, opened the front gate, and turned on the vehicle with the headlights off. Standing as though she had known in advance, she just gave him the hospital bag. Robert rushed to Rose and assisted her in getting into the car without saying anything. Everything was like traversing a minefield with potholes and rocks on the way to the hospital. Curves and the woman he once vowed not to love in the passenger seat, and who was the only person he wanted to see breathe at this moment. "Come on, Rose, breathe with me. Take a deep breath," she said, her teeth clenched. "I know what I have to do, just drive." And he drove as if he were carrying a sacred object. The hospital hallway smelled of. He felt his legs give as the doctors hurried back and forth, using disinfectant and urgency. "Are you the father?" they asked as they placed her in a wheelchair, and he paused for a moment, but not to ponder, just to allow the words, "Yes, I am." They let him in, and he remained by her side, firmly grasping her hand. His fingers ached from the intense squeezes in between contractions, but he didn't let. He whispered, "Go, Rose." She didn't respond, but she also didn't let go of him. The labor was hard and drawn out, but at one point the hours felt like weeks. The sound that filled the room was a tiny brand new cry rather than a scream of agony. The type of sound that is born only once and evolves into a piercing cry. Robert had to lean against the wall because his legs couldn't support him no matter what. Before he could stop them, tears started to fall. "It's a girl," the nurse said, with tears in her eyes. She slowly gave him the clean baby Rose wrapped in a blanket. She turned her face, feeling alive but exhausted, and she saw when he got there. Robert held his daughter in his arms like a person holding hope and fire. She was so tiny, so light, and so real that his hands were shaking and his eyes were wide. He looked at Rose and said, "Hello, little one." "Hello," in a broken voice. Tears filled her eyes. She was just a human, without makeup or armor. Strongly in pain, she nodded slightly, as if someone permitting something to be recognized, and he realized it wasn't, not yet, but it was a step in the right direction. In the days that followed, the house changed, and cries and rushing footsteps filled the air as the water bottles began to boil. Rose nursed in warm clothes while keeping a close eye on after every feeding. Robert volunteered to carry the infant. He discovered how to switch the baby's diapers to the right warm water temperature to soothe sobs while listening to gentle music. Donna Mercedes observed from a distance, didn't say much, but her eyes were as calm as a person watching as she was sitting with the baby one. Typical afternoon when the barren field started to bloom, carefully holding her in her arms as the sun filtered through the gilded window. Rose and Robert were in the kitchen, separated by the table, and she had white hair. Donna Mercedes called them as they exchanged quick looks in an attempt to understand the new language that was developing between them. "Now she's yours," she said bluntly as they walked up. "Looking what I could do, I've done a house attest, and," she said to the child who was sleeping in her lap, "love from both sides." She delicately gave Rose the baby, as if Rose embraced her with almost shy affection after returning a miracle. Looked at Robert, who remained silent and simply met her eyes. "I'm still not sure, forgive me," Rose said firmly, yet broken, "which I don't anticipate, but I believe I want to hear that phrase." He smiled. "It's okay," and said, eyes full of fear but also tenderness, "we're the beginning of everything that could still be. I wait, I'll be alright." And she trusted him, since there's a distinction between a person who stays and one who returns, and he was present, just by being there, without making any promises, without speaking. But at that precise moment they were a family, not flawless, but perhaps a new one, and no wound was fully healed. What do you believe this shared vulnerability means for life, a fragile hope? After such suffering, can love really be rekindled in Robert and Rose's future? Share your honest sentiments in the comments. Please remember to like and subscribe to this video. Lovely ending. As if aware of that haste, time moved slowly. Doesn't work for reconstruction. Days spent in that house were filled with new sounds rather than jarring silences. The timid laughter of a young girl starting to explore the world, the sound of tiny feet in the hallway, and the gentle discussions between two individuals who were finally learning to listen to. Robert woke up early, and the sun had just begun to peek over the rooftops. His hands were rough and his lunch was crammed into Rose when he was already dressed. A half-hour walk away was a construction site. The work was challenging but respectable, and more than that, it was a chance for him to create something substantial. He returned in the afternoon with his body, both inside and out. His face was sunburned and covered in dust, but as he passed through the wooden gate, he always came across the same scene: Rose and the young girl sitting on the terrace, her lap, or at her feet while experimenting with dry leaves, fabric scraps, and Rose would say, "Your bath is ready," without looking, making up stories for each new sound she learned. It was routine, but it wasn't. As he removed his filthy boots, it was automatic, a care that had developed gradually. Much like everything else that needed to be reborn, they would drink tea after his bath. She claimed that the cinnamon tea, which had more sugar than he preferred, helped him unwind. It was during those times that they gazed into each other's eyes and avoided discussing the past because it was unnecessary. What mattered was what They were developing the infant, who was now teething and walking erratically, had turned into the center of their world. Every new sound, every time they tried to say mommy, or as though they were afraid that fate would hear them, they celebrated Daddy with restrained joy. Rose grinned more, and it was different when it came time to collect what was rightfully hers. Smile more hopeful than he recalled her previous smile. Now, when Robert saw her, she did so with the smile of someone who no longer expects anything, felt a quiet appreciation for being permitted rather than for forgiveness, for being accepted, even if it doesn't reveal the entire story. For her decision to Sundays were the favorite days in that house, and they woke up slowly, even though she didn't have to stay. After lunch, Donna Mercedes explained how she made bread in a wood-fired oven, tales from her early years, to which the young girl listened without comprehension much, but everyone always applauded at the end, and occasionally Rose laughed, looked at Robert and noticed a new man, someone she had never met before, who asked for forgiveness in deeds rather than words, who came weary but still managed to fix the dripping tap or tell a story. She no longer claimed to have forgiven him, but that had been bothering them for days. She put her head on his chest as she lay next to him every night. That was sufficient. It was one of those evenings when the young child was dozing off on his lap and the warm wind was blowing across the terrace at that moment. Robert knelt, not hurriedly or in terror, but with a calmness Rose hadn't yet noticed in him. He grabbed a little cardboard box from inside his pocket. Was a plain, clean ring devoid of stones and glitter. Selected with consideration, funded by many hours of labor, and many nights of rescuing Rose. I was a fool. I was too stupid to recognize that I had loved you from the start. She looked at him without saying anything, but his gaze trembled despite his firm voice. The young girl continued to sleep, breathing quietly as though everything in the world was in its proper place. And you are my home and my bravery. Will you wed me once more? Only for love. Time paused. Rose glanced at the young girl. Then at her eyes welled up with tears. Not from sorrow, but from sheer passion. Took a while to respond because she understood that the answer was yes, indicating that it was a new starting to view the past as though someone were recalling the past, rather than forgetting its root that brought them to this point. Yes. Robert closed his eyes now for a moment, like someone finding refuge or exhaling a sigh of relief. Donna Mercedes observed in the shade of the plants at the rear of the courtyard. She didn't go close. Instead, she simply grinned quietly, as someone who knows that some harvests take time to complete. But now that they are blossoming, they are a true family, she whispered, with a gentle heart. The moon appeared to hear everything from the terrace, and their 3 lives were entwined beneath a sky full of unseen witnesses, not with assurances, but with actions that carried the burden of everything that had happened. And the being light-hearted about everything that could still be love was not a utopia. Rather, it was every sometimes. True love starts with falls rather than with promises, with no one noticing the wounds, but also with decisions made with someone who even decides to stay after everything is said and done, because love is not the same as caring, is to pay attention, to come back, to earn the right to remain. And occasionally what starts with suffering and concludes with a newborn resting in your arms and a heart that finally comprehends what it means to be genuinely loved. If you were moved by this tale until finally, let me know that you were present with me by leaving the comment. I stayed because those who persevere through the end recognize the importance of a fresh start.